So why is it that all the good headphones in the hi-fi world are open back instead of closed back? What is it that makes a closed back headphone just not as good? Let's get into it. This is one of my favorite headphones of all time. It's the DCA E3. It's a closed back headphone and I think it sounds magnificent, but there's also people I know who have had a very different experience from myself. The same goes for almost any other closed back headphone on the market. You could ask 3 different people how they feel about it and all 3 people give you a different answer. And part of that is that, yes, our hearing and our heads are all a little bit different, but it's more about our heads than it is our hearing. You'll notice that opinions around open backs, while they still vary a little bit, tend to be more in a similar direction. A lot of people will say the HG600 sound neutral. A lot of people will say that the DT880 sounds bright. And that's because, as you can see here, these are 3 graphs from the Harman data showing a microphone inside of a blocked ear canal. This is the same headphone on a bunch of different heads for each of these 3 graphs. So each graph is a different headphone on a bunch of different people's heads. And there's some level of variation, especially in the treble. That's not even accounting for people's ear canals. You take that open headphone, you put it on a bunch of different heads, and each of those heads is getting a slightly varied experience with a few that are pretty heavily varied. But then when we look at the Harman data for closed backs, we see this. These are closed back headphones on a variety of human heads, a different headphone for each graph, and then a different line for each person. That is a lot of variation. I mean, if you put this closed back headphone on a measurement rig and just moved it around a few times, you would not get anywhere near this. So why do closed backs get so much more variation from head to head than open backs do? Well, it's a factor of impedance. And not the type of impedance you're used to where a headphone may be 300 ohms like an HG600 or 32 ohms like a planar. That's electrical impedance. What we're talking about here is acoustic impedance. Impedance in general is just like resistance. If I try and walk through that wall, I'm not going to be able to do it. That wall has too much impedance for me to walk through it. If that wall was made out of, I don't know, a non-Newtonian fluid, I could probably walk through the wall, albeit not super quickly. Or like how water's going to have more impedance to your movement than air is. It's a lot easier to go like this in the air than it is to go like this in water. That is physical impedance. In this case, acoustic impedance is basically how open the area around your ear is to the outside. How much resistance is there between the airspace right here in your ear and the airspace outside of the headphone? And the more acoustic impedance you have, the more variance you're going to experience from person to person. As your head shape changes, as your ear shapes change, and as the amount of seal and airspace changes with it. That is what results in such dramatic changes in closed backs. The most common answer you see people saying is that closed backs just suck because they have reflections inside of these cups. And to an extent, that may be the case, really only in extremely high frequencies because those frequencies have a wavelength short enough to actually be affected by it. But that isn't really the problem with closed backs. The problem with closed backs is once you tune it for a person's head or tune it for a measurement rig, well, you're only tuning it for a very small subset of the population compared to the actual people who will be listening to it. Because again, once you put it on a different head, it's going to vary significantly because of that high acoustic impedance. So in reality, the best closed back would be finding a way to make a closed back headphone with low acoustic impedance that could still be isolating. And that, well, that's tough because to have isolation, you generally also have to have acoustic impedance to stop those sounds from coming in and stop your sounds from leaking out. So how do you have a design that's going to be very isolating so people can't hear your music and you can't hear them, but still has low acoustic resistance? That's the problem that closed backs face. But it's also a problem that certain active headphones aim to solve by playing different tones inside of the cup that you can't hear, picking them up with other microphones, and then trying to adjust the headphones to your specific head. We're seeing this more and more, but it doesn't solve the problem with acoustic impedance, it solves the problem by trying to just adapt and fill in the gaps. It's not a bad solution, in fact, it makes a lot of sense, but it's not going to apply to any closed backs like this that are just a straight up wired pair. By the way, if you haven't seen my review on these are the DCA E3. Again, I think these are one of the best headphones on the planet. You can check out the review for these over on The Headphone Show. It's a channel that I'm also a part of, as well as headphones.com. In fact, that is where I post most of my headphone reviews. Variation like this is probably why there are some people in the world who find a HiFiMAN closed back to sound good, despite them being So is the takeaway here that you just shouldn't buy any closed back headphones? No. It's that things like seal and head shape matter. I still love a lot of closed back headphones. I love the isolation of them. I like being able to hear a darker background in my music. But I do think if you're going to spend a lot of money on a closed back, you should either watch several reviews so you get an idea of what several different people think about them, or you should try them at a trade show like a Can Jam or something like that. There is a middle ground, which is semi-open closed backs. It's still going to have a lot of head variation because it's still a higher acoustic impedance design than an open back is. In fact, there's lots of open backs that are still relatively high in acoustic impedance and have more variation. The Own AR5000, or is it pronounced Aoun? I'm not sure, is a good example because if you put that on a couple different measurement rigs, you actually see more variance under 1 kilohertz than you would expect from a normal open back, a slightly higher acoustic impedance. And the same translates over to semi-open. So it's not as clear-cut as open backs are better in this regard and closed backs are worse and semi-opens are in the middle. Each headphone individually is going to vary based off its individual acoustic impedance, which would be really cool if we could kind of find a more common way to convey this information to people who are buying headphones, like a system for rating acoustic impedance. That would be really sick. So if you want an example of a very low acoustic impedance headphone, something like the HG800S, a headphone that is pretty dang open all across the board, or a headphone that is like a super completely open free field headphone like the Rawl SR1A, that's a good example. And there's literally nothing to seal that to your head, it's just totally open. The Koss Porta Pros, which are basically universally loved. Or some things like electrostatic headphones, like the Stax ones. These are all generally very low acoustic impedance designs that are going to be a bit more consistent from person to person. So when you're reading up on audio content in the future and you wonder, why do people have such varying opinions on these closed backs? Well, this is a big reason why. And closed backs, while they can be excellent, are definitely a victim to one of the biggest problems in headphones, that I cannot walk through that solid wall. And on that note, I think I'm going to wrap up this short little video. If you liked it, guys, leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you want to see in the future. If you want to get active in the community, you can hit the Discord or the Float Plane, both available at the link in the video description. If you want a way to support the channel, get early access to some interesting and fun behind-the-scenes content. As always, don't forget to stick around, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Till next one, guys. Peace.